So yesterday I decided to go on a nostalgic trip and post some edits of when Disney Channel and when Nickelodeon were black. And I just posted all of the shows and all of the movies that were black centered back in the 90s and early 2000s that we all got the chance to watch and was such a formative part of our childhoods and was just so awesome at that time because we were being represented as black people in so much media. But then the conversations of them, these networks using black people to get a leg up in their viewership and dropping us like a hot potato and never putting our content or our people on our screens ever again, right? And then also the conversation came up of who actually owns these networks. Like in the case of BET, which is actually not owned by black people anymore, and some people in the comments were actually surprised by that. But BET has not been owned by black people in a really long time, and BET is not BET like it used to be, and somebody in the comments also said, yeah, Boondocks tried to tell us, but they did, and they got reprimanded for it. But in all seriousness, where did the culture go? And why don't we see it on our screens as much as we used to, especially in children's content? So as everybody knows, the 90s and early 2000s was when it was really, really poppin' when it comes to black entertainment, black movies, black music, black TV shows, kids content, the whole thing. It was just very, very black. And we're going to be talking about Nickelodeon and Disney because that's what I posted about. But this also applies to, networks like Fox, UPN, and the WB, and the way that they used black content and then threw us and discarded us after they got their viewership. So with Nickelodeon, the heyday of Nickelodeon is really between 1994 to about 2004, okay? And that was when black shows were living on the channel rent free. They were the best shows on the channel. Everybody tuned in to watch our shows with our people, and they were just incredible. Whether we're talking about My Brother and Me, all that, Kenan and Kel, Cousin Skeeter, I even added Taina in there, Romeo, Just Jordan, True Jackson VP, that was an era, okay, for Nickelodeon. Okay, you had Good Burger in the theaters. It was really an era. And then with all that specifically, that was the home of hip hop and R&B. Every musical guest between 1994 and 1999 was mostly in the hip hop and R&B genre. And so our culture was being very, very heavily on the channel. Between that and the theme songs for these shows were also very, very hip hop, very, very R&B. It was just a time. It truly was a time. And even on Disney Channel in the early 2000s, they really, really had us on their channel, okay? Between The Famous Jet Jackson, The Color of Friendship, Up, Up and Away, Jump In, Twitches, all of those. Now in the mid 2000s and some in the 2010s, they would continue on a little bit with some black content, whether it's Ant Farm, whether it's Casey Undercover, whether it's Raven's Home, those type of things, but it wouldn't really stick. It wouldn't really land. It really, really, really wouldn't stay there, right? And now it's the 2020s and you turn on Disney Channel or you turn on Nickelodeon, and what do you see? You don't see us. You don't see us. And there's a reason for that. A lot of these channels when we were kids, especially in the 90s and the early 2000s, they used our people, they used our viewership, they used our culture to get a leg up. Before they started showing our content and our media on their channels, a lot of these channels were super dry. They were super dry, okay? Nickelodeon, for example, while the early 90s, late 80s was cool and everything, and I will give them that was kind of the where they were trying to figure out what Nickelodeon was really going to be. And while Clarissa Explains It All, Are You Afraid of the Dark, Pete and Pete, and the game shows as well were cool. I ain't gonna even hold you. Those were my shows. But they wouldn't really make the channel pop. Okay, it wasn't until 1994 when All That, and then in 96 Kenan and Kel, and then Cousin Skeeter, and then Taina. These shows were the shows that really made the channel pop. right? People were tuning in every Saturday night for Snick so they could watch all that, so they could see their favorite musical guests and see their favorite sketches. They would tune in to watch Kenan and Kel be wacky and be, crazy. And, they would watch Cousin Skeeter and the whole thing. Like, it was a whole thing, right? And then somewhere around 2004, they stopped showing us on their channel. Now, we might be, the best friend in a show, or we might be, the one-off character in an episode on a show. But we were not the main characters anymore. While we did have, yes, Just Jordan, and, we did have, yes, True Jackson VP, and those were cool. Those were cool. I think Just Jordan only lasted a season. And while I think True Jackson lasted maybe 2 or 3 seasons, they still did not give them their just due at this time. And after that, it was a fall off, a major fall off for the channel, because they didn't have any more black centered shows on the channel. You could say the Haunted Hathaways, but who remembers that? No offense. And they just stopped caring about our characters in general. Now, yes, you had like Andre on Victorious, and that was cool and everything, and like Tebow or whatever on iCarly and whatever, because that was weird. But literally, when you really say, when was the highlight and the heyday of Nickelodeon when it comes to black culture, everybody's going to point to the mid to late 90s and the very early 2000s. And after that, it fell off. And the same way with Disney. The very early 2000s, their cultural content was popping, okay? The Famous Jane Jackson, The Color of Friendship, Up, Up, and Away, Don't Look Under the Bed, Switches 2, The Cheetah Girls, the whole thing, right? That's So Raven, The Proud Family, you get it. And then around like 2008, 2009, they kind of stopped. Now, while yes, they still had Ant Farm, yes, they would do Case Undercover later on, yes, they would do Raven's Home, but that's because Raven is a huge star for Disney Channel, and they're going to be able to, capitalize on her. But honestly, if we're being honest, there was a whole stretch of time where did you see the black characters? And we're not talking Chad from High School Musical, okay? And we're not talking one-off characters from Camp Rock, okay? And we're not talking, Shake It Up. Well, yes, Zendaya is on there, and the brother who played on there too. That's cool and everything, but let's be honest. Were these shows really centered around black people? No. And that just tells you where Disney and Nickelodeon's heads were at this time. In the end, the people who actually cared about black culture and actually were making these culturally relevant shows and actually cared about us and were doing it in a positive way, Gullah Gullah Island, these type of shows, stopped making them. And they were cut from the channel. And they were gone. And then it just became, for Nickelodeon, The Dan Schneider Show, which we know what happened there. And for Disney, Hannah Montana, Wizards of Waverly Place, Sunny with a Chance, that whole thing. And we just kind of were tossed to the side, okay? We really were, right? And so now we are out of the picture. And it's really, really sad. And I just hope that for the sake of these new generations who are growing up watching shows and wanting shows that represent for them, I really hope that those kind of eras can come back and we can really start having these kind of culturally relevant shows coming back into the forefront, because they need to be there. Because there are so many kids growing up that are not seeing themselves on TV anymore, and that is so sad. But I hope it comes back.